Anyway, in a moment, you'll meet this gentleman. I want to mention that tomorrow night on NBC at 9:30, this is hard to believe, that David Letterman...
When the king of late-night television died, there was no fanfare, no red carpets, no grand Hollywood memorial. No orchestra played his theme song. No spotlight fell on his empty chair. Just silence. A silence so heavy, it seemed to echo across the same world he once made laugh. On January 23, 2005, Johnny Carson, the man who had tucked America into bed for 30 years, took his final breath at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The cause was respiratory failure brought on by emphysema, a battle he had fought quietly, as he did everything else. He was 79 years old. His family released a brief, almost cryptic statement. He was surrounded by his family, whose loss will be immeasurable. There will be no memorial service. That final line stunned the world. No memorial? No. Farewell? For a man who had been the heartbeat of late-night television? It felt wrong, almost unthinkable. But for those who truly understood Johnny Carson, it made perfect sense. Carson had always been an enigma, a man who lived for the applause yet fled from attention. The world knew the performer, the charming wit, the silver-haired host who could turn silence into laughter with a raised eyebrow. But behind the curtain was a man terrified of closeness, a man who measured every word, every relationship, as carefully as he timed his jokes. His longtime sidekick, Ed McMahon, once summed it up perfectly. Johnny was comfortable in front of 20 million people, and completely uncomfortable in front of 20. He was the most private public man who ever lived. And in death, he finally found the privacy he'd always craved. To understand Johnny Carson's end, you have to go back to his throne. The Tonight Show. For 3 decades, his voice and laughter defined American culture. From 1962 to 1992, Carson wasn't just a host. He was a ritual. Every night, millions tuned in to end their day with his monologue, his grin, and that unmistakable ease that made chaos feel like comedy. Politicians feared his punchlines. Celebrities longed for his approval. And comedians? They dreamed of one thing, sitting on that couch beside him. Because that was the moment you knew you'd made it. Not when your name lit up on billboards, or when critics wrote your praises, but when Johnny Carson invited you to talk. And for one woman, that invitation would change everything, and later, destroy her world. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It was Johnny Carson's nod of approval. And one night in 1965, a young woman named Joan Rivers earned that nod, a moment that would make her and destroy her. Before the fame, before the diamonds and red carpets, Joan Rivers was just another struggling comic in New York's smoky clubs. She slept in her car, worked temp jobs to survive, and performed in dingy basements where laughter was rare and pay was worse. By 1965, after years of rejection, she had nearly given up. Then came the night that changed everything. February 17th, 1965, it was supposed to be a mercy booking, a last favor from her manager, who also represented Bill Cosby. Rivers walked onto the stage of The Tonight Show with trembling hands and one last shot at a dream she thought had already died. But that night, everything clicked. The timing, the crowd, the spark. When she finished her set, Johnny Carson leaned toward her and said 6 words that would rewrite her destiny. "You're going to be a star." For a moment, Joan Rivers didn't believe him. She looked around, convinced he must be talking to someone else. But he wasn't. He meant her. That night, America met Joan Rivers, and Joan met her king. From that moment on, she became a regular on The Tonight Show. Each appearance was sharper, funnier, more fearless than the last. The chemistry between them was undeniable, a perfect balance of restraint and chaos. Johnny, calm and unshakable, ruled the stage with quiet confidence. Joan, bold and unpredictable, sliced through the room with wit that left even him in tears of laughter. When she launched her own short-lived daytime talk show in 1968, Carson stood by her side as her first guest, an act of loyalty that made national headlines. And when The Tonight Show needed someone to fill his chair, there was only one name that made sense. By 1983, Joan Rivers was no longer just a guest. She was the guest host, the permanent substitute for Johnny Carson, the heir apparent, the queen-in-waiting of late-night television. The public adored them, seeing in their partnership something magical. Mentor and protege, king and queen, laughter and lightning in a bottle. But fame has a cruel sense of timing, and the higher you rise, the further you have to fall. Behind the bright lights, their bond was not as deep as it appeared. Rivers later admitted that their friendship lived mostly on camera. During the commercial breaks, she wrote, we had nothing to say to each other. Carson was private, impenetrable, a man who guarded his personal world behind layers of charm. Joan didn't push. She respected the boundaries. Their connection wasn't personal. It was professional. But that bond, that unspoken hierarchy, meant everything to her. He had discovered her. He had given her a platform, a voice, a career. And for that, she gave him absolute loyalty. Until the day she couldn't. By the mid-1980s, the television landscape began to shift. NBC renewed Carson's contract for 2 years, but offered Joan only one. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A quiet reminder that while she was loved, she was still replaceable. Her future wasn't secure, and for the first time, she could feel the ground trembling beneath her feet. Is this conversation helpful so far? Then, a memo began circulating inside NBC, a quiet list of potential successors for Johnny Carson when he would eventually step down. Joan waited, hopeful, certain her name would be there. After all, she had sat beside him for nearly 2 decades, filling in as guest host, earning the audience's love and the respect of the man himself. But when she finally saw the list, her name was nowhere to be found. It shattered her. In that moment, she realized the network never saw her as a future, only as a temporary spark to keep the show warm. She wasn't a successor. She was a placeholder. And in Hollywood, that kind of realization burns deeper than any insult. So when a young, ambitious network called Fox approached her, Joan listened. They offered her something revolutionary, her own late-night show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, airing in direct competition with The Tonight Show. The paycheck was enormous, the creative control total, the opportunity once in a lifetime. Her husband and manager, Edgar Rosenberg, urged caution. "Don't tell Johnny until the deal is signed," he warned. He feared Carson's influence could kill the deal before it ever saw daylight. So Joan kept the secret, hoping to explain everything later. But fate moved faster than she could. Before she had the chance to call him, the story leaked to the press. Overnight, headlines painted her as Carson's rival, the woman who dared to challenge the king. Desperate, Joan picked up the phone and called Johnny herself. According to her, he answered. She tried to explain. He hung up. She called again. He hung up once more. And just like that, 2 decades of friendship, trust, and laughter ended with the sound of a phone clicking into silence. Johnny Carson, the man who had made her a star, never spoke to her again. To Johnny Carson, the betrayal was never about ratings or competition. It was about loyalty. He had discovered her, lifted her from the shadows of comedy clubs, and handed her his stage, his audience, his trust. To him, that meant everything. And when Joan accepted the offer from Fox, stepping into the same time slot as The Tonight Show, he saw it not as ambition, but as defiance. She had dared to challenge the king. From that moment, she was erased. Her name was banned from The Tonight Show. Her presence, her laughter, her memory, wiped clean from the kingdom she helped build. Carson's blacklist didn't stop with her. He made it clear that any celebrity who dared to appear on her new show would never be welcomed back on his. And in Hollywood, that was a death sentence. Joan's dream quickly turned into a nightmare. The excitement that once surrounded The Late Show starring Joan Rivers began to fade. Big-name guests stayed away, sponsors grew nervous, and tension built behind the scenes. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, the man who had convinced her to take the deal, clashed with network executives. Within a year, the show was canceled. Then came the unthinkable. Just 3 months after they were both fired, Edgar took his own life. In an instant, the woman who once ruled late-night television lost everything: her husband, her career, and her will to laugh. And through it all, the man who could have offered a word of comfort stayed silent. Johnny didn't send flowers, didn't send a note, didn't even whisper her name. To Joan, that silence was colder than death itself. Years later, she would describe it with haunting simplicity. It was like Stalin had sent me to Siberia. When Johnny Carson died in 2005, there was no funeral for the world to attend. No service, no stage, no speeches. Just silence, fitting for a man who had mastered the art of vanishing when the lights went out. But in that silence, one ghost lingered at his invisible funeral: the ghost of Joan Rivers. For nearly 20 years, she carried the weight of that unspoken goodbye. Every interview, every stage appearance, every laugh she gave the world was painted with a trace of sorrow she could never fully hide. Behind the punchlines and sharp comebacks lived a wound that never quite healed. It wasn't about fame, money, or the talk show that came between them. It was about loyalty and the heartbreak of losing the one person who had once believed in her more than anyone else. Joan spoke of Carson with contradictions that revealed the truth. In one breath, she'd call him a mean son of a, her pain slipping through the humor. In the next, she'd call him the greatest straight man in comedy, her respect softening the edges of anger. Because deep down, she never stopped admiring him. She never stopped missing him. She didn't want revenge or redemption. She only wished for forgiveness, for the chance to make him laugh one last time. But that chance, like Johnny himself, was gone, leaving only silence, the kind that echoes louder than applause. Years later, Joan visited the cemetery where Carson's ashes were interred. It was supposed to be just another scene for her reality show, Joan and Melissa. Joan knows best. But when the cameras started rolling, something shifted. The humor that usually shielded her vanished, replaced by the weight of unfinished goodbyes. Standing beside his resting place, Joan's voice trembled as she spoke to the man who had once defined her career, and in many ways destroyed it. There were no punchlines, no applause, just a woman confronting the silence that had haunted her for decades. She confessed she wished things had ended differently, that the laughter they shared hadn't turned into a wall neither could climb over. Her voice cracked as she imagined the simplest reconciliation. One line, one smile, one acknowledgement from the man who had once said, "You're going to be a star." She said she wished he had just invited her back on the show after everything, even for a brief moment, to look her in the eyes and ask, "Where have you been?" That, she said, would have been enough. A small act of grace between two legends who built late night together, before pride and pain tore it all apart. But that moment never came. And so she stood there, not as the comedian who made the world laugh, but as a woman mourning a friendship that fame couldn't save. Johnny Carson died as he lived, privately, silently, and on his own terms. The man who built a kingdom from laughter left without a single goodbye. But in the silence he left behind, one story refused to fade. Not his fame, not his ratings, but the ghost of the woman he could never forgive. Joan Rivers became the living echo of his legacy, a reminder that even kings can bleed, that loyalty can break, and that silence can speak louder than words. Their friendship was once the heartbeat of late-night television, two sharp minds connected by humor, ambition, and mutual respect. Johnny saw in Joan a reflection of himself, a relentless dreamer who fought for a place in a man's world. He gave her a chance when no one else would, declaring, "You're going to be a star." And she was. But stardom comes with choices, and one choice shattered everything. When Joan accepted her own talk show, the same network rivaled Carson's empire. He saw it as betrayal, not ambition. That day, the man who made millions laugh hung up the phone and never spoke to her again. Years later, Joan tried to reconcile, to say goodbye, but Johnny's silence never broke. When he passed, she learned about his death from the news, not a friend. There was no guest at Johnny Carson's funeral, only a memory, a haunting reminder that sometimes the loudest endings are written in silence.